Hey, what's happening? This is your host Tinto, and I'm back after an incredibly amazing, I don't even know what to describe it, Christmas. I had the best one ever, and I hope you guys did too. And before we get started on this last episode of the year, I thought to give a shout out to everybody that made the podcast thrive, that made my Christmas so great, and that set the tone for an amazing 2022. Starting with you, DJ TSQ. You got me an amazing 5 coffees, and your comment there is, this one is for Kanye. Hey, Kanye, I'll sort you out, man. Somebody got you a coffee. And then Wenkosi, thank you for your generous contribution. Your comment there is, Tinto, I never wanted any part of this, but your people roped me in. Hey, my people, you did a great job because Wenkosi is hooked. It's been quite a ride, but these last few episodes, Lord, I can't deal. And then heading over to Chiedza, thank you for your generous gift. And your comment there's congratulations on 100 episodes. Here's to 100 more. Happy holidays. Thank you, Chiedza. And then To Doobie, hey, my girl from South Africa. Thank you for the generous contribution. And your comment there is, here is to the 100th episode. Ooh, bit of a tongue twister there. And then I've learned a lot from this podcast and people's testimonies. Thank you for this platform, Puti. Hey, siyabonga mama. And then I head over to Tino, and you got me an amazing number of coffees as well. Your comment there is, it's been a pleasurable 100 episodes. Really appreciate. Hey, I appreciate you too. Laura, thank you so much. Another generous contribution. And your comment is, here's to the podcast that I love so very much. You are here doing the Lord's work. Amen. And then Tadiwa Ndozia, thank you very much for your generous contribution as well. And your comment there is, cheers to 100 episodes. My contribution as a broke student to the podcast and the podcast of all podcasts. Hey, thanks for hyping me and gassing me, man. And then P Power, hey, what's happening down south? Thank you so much for your generous contribution as well. Your comment there is 100 episodes, wow. And then you got the 2 clap emojis and you say, keep doing great, Tinto. It can only get better from here. I appreciate that. Unpack with Michelle, man, you've been my day one supporter. Thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for roping all of your friends onto the podcast. And your comment is, congratulations on reaching 100 episodes, Tinto. You are making a real change and impacting people's lives. Thank you for being an inspiration and a mentor. You are welcome. No Brown in Town podcast. Thank you for your generous gift. Your comment there is mud things. Congratulations on going 100 episodes. Thank you so much. VS Jade, this is not the first time you've given to the podcast, so I want to give a special shout out to you to say thank you very much. And your comment there is, happy 100th episode. So happy to be here for this major milestone. Your show helps people more than you can ever imagine, and I endeavor to invest more one day. Man, VS Jade, you've invested enough already. Thank you so much. Needless to say, you guys already know who this is. Titi Ray Bogas. Wagwan. Another generous contribution. And your comment there is, Merry Christmas and congrats on getting to episode 100. It's the likes of you that make this happen. Thank you so much. Somebody anonymous. Whew, an incredible amount of coffees. And your comment there is, you have a calling for being a relationship psychiatrist. Caught the wave a little late, but it's been a wild ride. I binged on 100 episodes in a month while stuck in the motherland due to Omicron and being red zoned. I could totally relate to almost every episode. I have sympathized, cried, cheered all of the brave people who share their stories, particularly Kanye. Thank you for being a blessing to us. Your podcast is infectious, your laugh is infectious, and making me realize that there's definitely more to life after heartbreak. Keep doing mud things and be blessed. Oh man, whoever you are, that is so heartwarming. I appreciate you to the moon and back. And then just a few seconds ago, I got, 20 coffees from Pi and Chi. I don't know who you guys are. You kind of kept it a bit anonymous. But your comment there is, thank you, Tinto, for keeping us entertained throughout the year and providing us with life lessons to go along with it. God bless. Man, what an incredible year. That's all I can say. From now on, I'm going to start calling you guys feelers because you are really a part of the podcast. And if you'd like to do the same and support the podcast going into 2022, please head over to www.buymeacoffee.com/feeling station and give as your spirit leads. Remember, there is nothing that is too small to support the podcast you've grown to love. With that out of the way, let's head over into a bonus episode to close off the year. We're going to start episode 101 in 2022.
All up in my feelings, I'm all up in my feelings, yeah.
Hello.
Yo, what's happening?
Hi, Tinto.
That's got to be one of the softest hellos I've heard in a long time. Let's try this again. Gling.
Hello.
Okay, easy love.
It's been a busy morning. So
Already, you're supposed to be winding down. Come on, it's like Christmas time. Right? So what's going on there?
Well, I'm a very last-minute.com person, so everything is like go today, and I'm also not a morning person, so I'm a bit delayed.
So I'm guessing calling at this time is not too bad because it's bang on between morning and afternoon, right?
Yes.
So I'm kind of getting the best version of you.
Yeah, I think so. Best dish. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hang out and do this in person. Bloody COVID, eh?
Oh, I'm so over.
Bloody COVID.
I'm so over this pandemic.
Well, all I'm just hoping is that at least they don't cancel Christmas. Because if they do, guys, that's like 2 years in a row.
No, there's no way. The British public will not have it. They'll be in the streets. Everything else they can deal with, but canceling Christmas,
it's not happening.
Pigs in blankets.
It's not pigs in blankets.
They need them.
Well, thanks, man, for making time to listen to the 5-part series. Man, there's been so much feedback. It is overwhelming.
Oh gosh, I think that 5-part series has been the most powerful, really, of all the episodes I've listened to. So quite expected, very powerful.
But what I was hoping to do would be to engage a couple of people in the same way that I'm engaging you, but just the sheer volume. Honestly, I would have been up and down the country for at least 2 weeks and having telephone conversations for about just as long. And God knows how long that would have taken to put everything together. So you get to be the one that at least gets to speak about this for two main reasons. One, we kind of had an initial discussion.
Yeah.
But I could tell that with the passion that you were speaking, there was a hell of a lot to say. So we're going to try and touch on it today.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot that came out of the episode, and I'm not even going to try and steer this, because there's things like GBV, there's the church, there's the role of family, esteem issues, breaking cycles of abuse, acceptance, self-love. The list is endless.
Yeah. I was quite shocked, actually, that Kanye only came out with 7 lessons because, whoa.
It felt like it needed way more than that, right?
Yeah, it was very, 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 intense. I think the first thing I want to say is, Kanye, baby girl, wow. Never underestimate the magnitude of what you've done.
Yeah.
Because being able to kind of break free from an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult. I want to kind of send my love to her. There was so many lessons I learned.
Mm-hmm.
My initial thoughts when I finished the sort of 5th episode was that everything we heard is really a narration of the ways in which patriarchy oppresses us and really encompasses our everyday interactions, our decisions, and even our values. And I wonder whether people thought about that, because patriarchy as a concept often is seen as something far removed, something that's happening over there and not necessarily impacting us in the way that we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first thing that came out was sort of Jack's behavior. Mm-hmm. Jack's toxic masculinity. That's a manifestation of patriarchal masculinity. The entitlement that men have or afforded.
Well, before we even go too far, you're using big college words, Shaman. I'm sad. I'm like, rah, okay, this is deep. So you called it patriarchy, what? Misogynist? What?
Okay, so
kind of break those down at least for me.
Okay, I'll break it down. So patriarchy is a system that basically has the notion that men are superior to women.
Okay.
So it's what enforces patriarchy is sexism, basically a misogyny. Yeah. So it manifests in different ways. So patriarchal laws, customs, the sort of cultural aspects, social norms even. And we see that in sort of everyday interactions and how women are relegated to be inferior. So, I will explain and give more examples to kind of bring to life what it is that I what I got from the episode, but it
Okay.
certainly was to me a journal of patriarchy in impacting a woman's life in essence. So an aspect of patriarchy is that it determines the kind of masculinity that men have. The masculinity centered on power and dominance, and it also determines the femininity that women have, centered on being nurturers, being inferior, aspiring for marriage, all of those aspects, shaming single mothers. All of those aspects are rooted in patriarchy. And I hope I will say it in a very sort of user friendly way, because I can be a bit academic. So please stop me if I do.
Well, there's just one thing I just want to touch on before we move too far from that one. So you mentioned nurturing, and the nature of nurturing being associated with women, and that's a result of patriarchy. Blah 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 blah. So I've got two little bunnies here for my son. He absolutely loves those. And I didn't realize that these two bunnies had two little babies, whatever they're called, about a month ago. So the process has gone from that bunny getting pregnant, delivering, and nurturing two little young ones that are looking amazing now, naturally. So for me, nurturing and associating that with motherhood almost sounds like a natural thing without patriarchy.
Well, is patriarchy making you say that it's natural? Because what we know is, it is the concept of gender is social conditioning. We're socialized into how we behave. Sex and gender are very different things. So biology doesn't determine how we navigate the world. It is what we learn about the roles our sex means to the world. So. You'll notice it in how girls are raised differently to boys. Even this concept of pink being for girls, blue for boys, boys don't cry. Girls, are steered towards certain activities, and as they grow, what then happens is also the environment and society also imprints messages on children in how they behave. Girls are told to kind of sit with their legs closed and be wary of appearing a certain way. We have the purity culture around virginity and all of those aspects for women that are not placed on men in the same respects. So all of those things, not every woman is a nurturer. Not everyone wants to have children. Not everyone wants to take on this role of caregiver. That is a role that is assigned to us by society, by our social conditioning. So even the very fact that you think that is a permutation of social conditioning and patriarchy.
So when I'm looking at what Cambridge says about nurturing, one of the key words that it says is to feed. So if I don't have breasts, and assuming that breastfeeding is the natural way of, if you can, by the way, because some can't breastfeed for various reasons. But if you can breastfeed and you have breasts and you're feeding, you're nurturing for your young baby. Now, what it also says, it says to protect. And one of the things that I've seen with this little bunny, when I went to try and pick up the little kids, it was feisty. He wanted to protect them as much as he could, in the same way that a male could protect. So for me, this nurturing aspect feels quite balanced, in that if I don't have breasts and you have breasts and you can feed, you will feed. And if I have the ability to protect, which is part of this definition of nurturing, then I protect.
Well, I think you were getting into quite complex territory there, because that's perhaps a conversation for another day, because there are aspects about our biology being there in essence for our survival as human beings, the propagation of the human species in essence. It doesn't, but the role of nurturer for women extends beyond that, because what we know is actually feeding is a normal kind of thing. Women who have uteruses, or women who can give birth, that is a biological aspect. It doesn't necessarily mean that their social conditioning of gender is around solely being a caregiver, and that's a whole nother topic.
Right. Okay. Let's not get lost in the weeds then with that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So you were still going on and saying that a lot of what was coming out in this episode was a reflection of how patriarchy is so deeply rooted in our society. Now, when we're talking society, is this society where we are because we're in the UK, or this is society from an African perspective?
It's both, because we live in a very patriarchal world. And I think, but in this context, we have the added aspect of very, cultural norms that are embedded in the Zimbabwean kind of way of life that really are quite powerful ways of being able to exert control and power over certain individuals more than others. So like I was saying, in terms of sort of Jack's masculinity, very much centered on dominance, power, very much sort of, centered on hypersexuality, and particularly even if it's destructive in how men behave, his male privilege affords him a bit of freedom around the scrutiny of having, many children by many women. Whereas if the roles were reversed and Kanye had been the one to enter a relationship and have 3 children by 3 different men, it's very likely that actually culturally she wouldn't have been accepted by, her suitor's kind of family in the way that Jack was eventually accepted. So again, that is a permutation of male privilege, of how men are afforded a certain, freedom in the way that women aren't. And, we also saw the realities and complexities of domestic violence.
Oh, yeah. Oof.
Yeah.
That for me was one of the things that was most difficult to listen to.
Yeah, that was incredibly difficult. I think a lot of viewers, I would imagine, oscillated between feeling furious at Jack's behavior, but also furious at Kanye's behavior. And that impulse really to victim blame is one that we have to talk about and one that we have to resist, in essence, because what we know from research is that, it often takes victims at least 5 attempts to leave an abusive situation. We got 5? A snapshot of, at the very least.
Wow.
Yeah. We got a snapshot of, go on, sorry.
Did you know why research pinpoints that to be the reason? As in, why is it so difficult?
Okay, yeah. And what we got was a snapshot of Kanye's experience, but there would have been a lot of emotional abuse and control that may have been difficult for her to describe. So little things that are almost intangible, but equally very powerful in any respect to kind of contribute to victims feeling trapped, confused, etc. We also know that actually from research, the point where a woman decides to leave is actually the most dangerous point, really. When you look at stats for femicide, for instance, though, that loss of control that an abuser feels often heightens abuse. So it can be very difficult for women to kind of leave, particularly if they don't have a safety plan and a safety net. And in Kanye's situation, she was very isolated, not in terms of not having people around her, but in the kind of shame that she felt that she couldn't speak about this abuse. And again, that is a manifestation of patriarchy, in that women are blamed and shamed for the behavior of men. Yeah, we see that even when we talk about, rape, for instance. The rape culture, there'll be all sorts of talk about, but what was she wearing? But why are you sure she didn't lead him on? So there's this overhang over society where actually, even in marriages, particularly in the Zimbabwean context, a marriage breaks down or a man cheats, and there's often this narrative of, well, were you giving him enough sex? Well, what did you do? He must not have been happy about what you did as a person, as opposed to actually holding men accountable for their own behavior.
Let's just talk about holding men accountable for their own behavior in that regard. What are some of the ways that could be done?
Okay, the first thing, right, in this case, I'll refer to Jack. I think the first thing is Jack hasn't been held accountable for being a deadbeat dad, in essence. He and that may be, a lot to do with the women in his life, the family he has, but also it's impossible for him to be a present father to so many children.
Yeah.
But the role of father is such that actually the way society conditions the role of father is such that fathers can drop in and out. They can opt out. They can, come in and out. They can be involved in the fun things, or they can be applauded for basic things, whereas the role of permanent caregiver is assigned to women, and that whole responsibility. So I think there's an aspect about how society views fathers and accepts deadbeat dads in a way, because he didn't really lose any kind of social capital. He was accepted eventually by Kanye's family. His own family kind of just accepted that behavior.
Yeah.
We also saw that his sister was a big enabler, not just an enabler of the domestic violence, and how she enabled domestic violence really is quite classic of our society, is turning a blind eye, pretending it's not happening, it's not my business. But actually what that happens is that it perpetuates violence, because what we know is domestic violence thrives in secrecy. And that is how Jack was able to continue with his behavior, because Kanye herself was not holding him accountable. And yes, as a victim, there's a power dynamic, there's emotional abuse, there's a level of feeling unable there's a level of feeling paralyzed in that situation, but there seemed to be no consequence for his behavior. And she kept it secret. That whole aspect of saving face again is a huge aspect about culture, particularly culture in respect of Zimbabwe culture, where everything is swept under the rug. Things are not necessarily out in the open. Sexuality is not discussed out in the open. Difficulties in marriages are not discussed out in the open. And that all contributes to the way that we navigate relationships, particularly if you're coming from a very conservative culture.
So one of the things that that came out in terms of trying to make him accountable to the law was him being reported to the police in the first instance by one of his baby mamas. So he had to be accountable to the law for his actions, right? And he was given a caution of a sort. And then somewhere along the lines, Kanye did the same. Sent him over to law enforcers to be accountable to the law for the actions that he did. So there was some measure of accountability there. Outside of the law, because one thing that was very clear was there was a fear of how social services would have played out in this dynamics from parts 1 to 5. And so there was a fear of making that person accountable to law.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not asking for expert opinion on this, because I'm also trying to find a way how men listening to this can learn to be accountable outside of the law. What are some of the other ways that people could hold men accountable for some of the atrocious thing that they do to women outside of the law? If any, is there any route at all?
I think that the first thing is for people to be very aware of the impact of their behavior. And perhaps that is an aspect of male privilege, is that because you're not feeling the impact of certain things, you kind of dismiss them and don't connect with them. And the aspect of harming children is something that is seldom talked about, and everyone thinks about physical harm, but really the emotional harm that children suffer when exposed to domestic violence is exponential. Really.
Yeah.
And I understand why Kanye was anxious about that, because domestic violence is abuse. So that's the extreme. Is what we get, is people understanding the impact that this has on their children, and that in essence, if their behavior may result in the state kind of stepping in and parenting on their behalf, and that includes men and women, or husband and wife, or whatever dynamic that heterosexual relationship has. And I know I'm speaking from a position of privilege in the sense that this is the UK system. In Zimbabwe, things are very different, or in Africa and other parts of the world, things are very different in how that works. Yeah.
So I know we really didn't have a discussion into what could have prompted Jack to have that behavior. But from the sound of things, if you grow up in your home where love is what you see from day one up until you die, right? There's a good chance that you're going to give that same and model that same view of love to your children, and their children will do the same. So I think there was a possibility that Jack was reflecting something that he grew up around.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. The thing is, we're all impacted by our experiences, isn't it? They play a role in how our personalities develop and how we learn how to interact with adults, with others around us. So I don't underestimate that. Obviously, adversity in your childhood, so not having that love modeled for you, that healthy relationship modeled for you, can have an impact on how you form a template of how relationships are supposed to be, and how you navigate fatherhood, motherhood, whatever it may be. However, I think it's a complex issue in the sense that we have to be careful not to also excuse bad behavior. Because as much as we know that people who have had difficult circumstances can make bad decisions or wound up recreating those patterns, we also know that there are people that have had difficult circumstances and haven't recreated those patterns. So, not everyone who suffers abuse or who isn't able to have that love modeled goes on to abuse. In essence, there are many other factors that can play a role in that. And I suppose there's a wealth of information that we don't know about Jack. But what we know is that Jack navigates relationships with women in a very dysfunctional, in a very entitled way.
Which from a very small snippet in the 5-part series, we got a sense of he didn't have a great relationship with his dad, and I get the sense that the dad has a lot of women with a lot of children as well, which is not dissimilar. There's a saying that goes that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah, he may very well be kind of recreating those patterns. But another aspect is how society views single parents, and I'll tie this into sort of how Jack navigated his relationship with Kanye. So literally, the stigma around single mothers is really about the worth of a woman being tied to being legitimized via marriage or a man picking her. Yeah. So you see that the level of social conditioning in this regard was so glaringly obvious in how Kanye was so preoccupied with the concept of being married, even in the midst of an abusive relationship to a very mediocre man.
Now, where does that stem from? Because this is not the first episode where the focus has been marriage. I'm going to become Mrs. ABCDE.
Okay. I'll say patriarchy. And the reason that is because the system of patriarchy, the social norms of patriarchy that say men are superior to women, affords men the power to be able to determine what is a respectable woman versus what is not a respectable woman, for instance.
But what about the desire for the woman to get married on her own, despite what the man says your place in the marriage is? Just the desire to want to get married.
I think there's a difference between the desire to be partnered. In essence, we all want to find companionship, love, etc. But there's a preoccupation with marriage, and that is because girls are socialized from quite young about marriage. Don't lose your virginity because you will not get a husband. Don't do this because you will not be picked. Don't wear that because men will view you in a particular way. Those are all things that are all social norms that are become ingrained. That really then you aspire to be legitimized. The marriage in particularly the Zimbabwean context affords women a kind of status, and we see that in how the cultural practice of lobola, which is really a rebranding of oppression, in my view, is done. It is about men in your family determining your value, and what is being traded is a woman's rights and autonomy in that transaction. But that way that society then views a woman could, I'll say it in Shona, then I'll loosely translate it, is visirwa mari, she had money paid for her, affords women a certain status in society. So it is, the aspiration for marriage is very much ingrained in women and how girls are raised. And I think Kanye spoke about being a homemaker, being cooking, and even pandering to Jack's unreasonable demands that even at a family function, he wouldn't eat what was being made there. She had to cook for him. And so all of those things are about being socialized to be this wife, whereas men and boys are really socialized to be free, to be independent, to sow their seeds, to, they don't have that. And then they're told that when they're ready, they then pick a suitable wife.
Interesting you describe it like that, because there's two things happening. Well, two things that I've noticed happening and that I've seen personally. I've been to a Aurora ceremony where huge financial demands were being made. And it actually really did feel like the woman was a commodity being traded, right? And then I've also been to another one where the father said, all I want is £1, because that £1 is your expression of gratitude that you are becoming part of our family. So to me, it feels like there's two growing different views about what this whole Aurora thinks. And there's countless number of spaces that have spoken about how women no longer want to be viewed as this commodity, and they want it more to be an expression of appreciation and a welcome to the family. So
go on. I get triggered by the word lobola. That's why I was about to say no. Do not use token of appreciation, Tinto.
So I mean, but that's the way the things are kind of panning out. There's this. We can't deny that there's a fight between two schools of thought, the commodity school of thought and the one that is now saying, "Hey, welcome to the family."
Yes. And I mean, the aspect of lobola, I've written an article about it. And the thing is, people look at it in a very sort of simplistic way. And the only sort of criticism levied against it is about how much money is being charged, but the practice is rooted in a woman having no agency, because it is her family or the men in her family that are making decisions on her behalf. Now, the aspect of it being a token of appreciation, people don't understand what that token of appreciation is, because traditionally that token that is being appreciated is a woman's reproductive rights and sexual rights over her body by her husband. And you see that in how, children are owned by their fathers, in the cultural sense.
Explain that.
As in Shona culture, a mother is always considered mutorwa, as in a foreigner to her own children. The children are considered to be from the lineage of the father. So maternal heritage is relegated, and that is around the process of Rora, the process of lobola. So there are loads of kind of aspects within that I think when we use words like it's a token of appreciation, that is rhetoric that is really used to sanitize a process that places women in a position where they have no agency, where their worth is being determined by men in the same way that a man doesn't have that. And, there's also fancy language used around it to make us feel better about it. But the crux of it is that women are seen to be in a particular position and men are seen to have the power to be able to negotiate.
So is this tied specifically to Zimbabwean culture? Because I know for a fact when I visited Ghana, I was intrigued by the fact that the Ashanti tribe is actually got a matrilineal society where lineage is traced via the female.
It is. They are. I mean, historically speaking, when you look back to how civilization emerged, initially lineage was matrilineal in the sense that people were only sure of who your mother was, and the rise of certain other things, economic changes, industrialization, colonization, all of those things had an impact on that. And then women started to be viewed as property, and children started to be viewed as property, as labor, with the rise of sort of farming and herder communities kind of developing. And also there was taboos of sort of endogamy. And then now endogamy is when you can have children.
College words, fam. College words. What the hell is that?
Sorry. It's
even if I wanted to spell it, I don't think I could spell that word.
I'm sorry. It's the concept of being able to have children with a family member, be it a sister, a cousin, a brother, etc. So those things were rife, like in early sort of civilization. But when those taboos started to emerge, what you then saw was that people were then needing to marry out.
Okay.
And so they then needed to be one identification of who the father of these children were in the sense of property. So when marriages were happening outside of the family, there was then this anxiety about who will be the legitimate beneficiaries of this man's wealth, of this man's property, of this man's land. Therefore, there was this need to kind of move over to a patrilineal kind of system where heritage is passed down via paternal.
Okay. That's a very interesting view. And I'd be intrigued. I'm probably going to read a little more about the Ashanti people, because that still remains the case today. It's still matrilineal. So I think there's something to pick up from that. And I got a number of Ghanaian friends. I'll try and see if I can tap into their view of that stuff. But hey, that's deep. Let's move on to the church, if you have a view, because the church, was involved at some point to have this conversation. Do you have a take on that?
I do, and I think religion is a huge patriarchal tool. Literally, the Bible, the Christian Bible, the Abrahamic religion, positions women in a particular way. Women are seen as inferior again. Women are seen as property. There's a huge emphasis on the purity culture aspect of women as opposed to men. So the church really spews that rhetoric and is very invested in maintaining this balance or this dynamic. So how we see the church play out in Kanye's life really is around, firstly, the concept of the taboo of divorce. I think that is a permeation. Really. And the fact that everything is dealt with via sort of maladaptive ways. So it's not unusual to hear the church want to deal with domestic violence by prayer, by things that don't actually address the situation. And again, that's a level of accountability that is lacking in churches. Men generally are not held accountable for their behavior in church. They are afforded forgiveness. They are afforded, sort of redemption, where there is no action to actually evidence that. Also, I think Jack, in this respect, used the church as almost a cover, as a smokescreen for his behavior. In essence, he painted a picture of this very sort of tortured man who is caught between a rock and a hard place, wanting to be good, but then has these challenges with women. And again, we see this play out, that actually the bad behavior of men is not seen as abusive. It is seen as more character flaws and personality flaws, whereas a woman wouldn't be afforded that same grace. And that's a permeation of the church. A big aspect as well was how Christian values can be quite limiting in the sense that you if you feel that what you're doing is God ordained, it can be very difficult to see it for what it really is. And I know that people have used religion for various things. They find a lot of emotional support, emotional crutch. Some of it, but most of it is social conditioning. Again, it's childhood indoctrination. You often develop the religion that you were raised to have. as you would if you were born in, in the Middle East. You might have a different religion then because of how you were raised. It was very interesting for me to see also that the role of family in this whole dynamic colluded with the abuser.
Yeah.
There was
well, before we even move to that one, there's just one piece I wanted to touch on religion before we move to the family aspect. There's sayings and songs like "Give me that old time religion," right? And then statements like "Man will change, but God will never change. God is as constant as the northern star." And they use that as a premise to justify sticking to a very blinkered view of the Bible and what it means to be godlike and what God wants you to model. And unfortunately, what that does is it creates a breed of people who are unable to touch on real life issues. Right? So for instance, in the church that I grew up, not once did I ever hear a discussion about the problem of pornography and the effects it has on young people and future relationships. Because God wouldn't want you to talk about pornography. God doesn't talk about pornography in the Bible. So because of that, we're going to dismiss it, but it's an endemic issue in society. So what one of my comments was going to be as far as the church is, whilst it's good to say, give me that old time religion and God will never change, God is very constant. I think we need to have some active movement for people to understand that the church actually needs to be more dynamic than it is static. Because the problems that you have in the world are constantly changing. Society that you had 100 years ago is not society you have today. And because of that, there has to be some accommodation within the church to say, hey, look, do you know what? Domestic violence is a real issue. And if the Bible says that women should not speak and they should ask of their husband, which is actually a text in the Bible, that doesn't apply. Or it shouldn't apply in a situation where somebody's being abused because you're creating physical harm. And I can't imagine God being happy with someone being beaten up on the face. And I can't imagine that God has got the pearly gates open for somebody to come in who's laid hands on 1,000 women.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
I mean, I see exactly what you mean, but I think you are asking too much of a patriarchal religion. It is exactly on brand with that it sets out to
well,
be.
I don't even know if I really am, because I know there's a church that I visited about 8 weeks ago. Not by accident, I was invited. And one of the things they were encouraging people to do were to speak up if they were in abusive relationships. And I was pleasantly surprised because I haven't been to church in a very long time. But being in a church and hearing that versus where I had been before, where that would never be a discussion. In fact, on one of the, I think it was part 4, I mentioned the story of a very close friend of mine who reported abuse to the church. She was abused for 10 solid years by her own husband, who happened to be an elder. And all they said was, let's pray, let's pray, let's pray. So coming from that, and then hearing this 10 years down the line where it's an open discussion, I feel like there is some change.
I think there are definitely exceptions, but the general rule is that the church is quite prescriptive and quite rigid. And, being able to talk about pornography, for instance, means that you're accepting that, you need to veer away from this purity doctrine of just don't engage, just abstain. So there are aspects of it contradicting and being it too difficult to have conversations when you are running a narrative about a very prescriptive narrative about how people should behave. Also, the church is very much its view of sex, its view of things like that is it's rooted in shame. So, and that's a big part of how forgiveness and tithes and all of that and redemption works, is that you need to constantly be shaming and guilting people it's a cycle for them to come and repent. And that is on brand with the church. And when we think, look at the Catholic Church and the atrocities they've gotten away with, for centuries. When we think about domestic violence, it being able to address that head on as a church is now having to tackle the wives must submit to their husbands rhetoric that they so desperately need, because ultimately Christianity is a patriarchal religion in the sense that it sets a dynamic, between men, women, or partners. It sets a dynamic even for children. Children have very little rights in the Bible. That whole spare the rod, spoil the child kind of rhetoric. Yeah. So I think I absolutely agree that we have to reimagine spirituality, and we have to challenge that concept of God being the way that is depicted, in the way that it's kind of perpetuated in organized religion. But I don't share your optimism that we will see a wave of churches suddenly becoming socially conscious and responsible, because I think that would go against a lot of the things that they benefit from.
I think we might. Really, really, really think we might. For instance, women, for starters, were not allowed to be pastors in the church that I grew up in. But now we've got significant number of women ministering in the church. Which is something
like progress.
It does, but albeit very slow progress. I mean, I think there is a glimmer of hope. I think more so in the first world, and I hope people take this the right way, in the first world, because I think people recognize just how bad it has become, and are more willing to start having that conversation. For instance, I know there's a lot of conversations now about the problematic issue of homosexuality in the Catholic Church and pedophilia. Whereas these conversations were swept under the rug for so long, now they're starting to open up to it. And now that accountability we were talking about is something that is being spoken about and wasn't spoken about a few years ago.
Well, I don't know. I think the church has a long way to go, really, in terms of human rights in general. Whether it be rights for the queer community, for women, for children, etc. Now, your example about there, being women pastors now, sounds like a giant leap of progression. But I wonder whether if a woman pastor was embroiled in a sort of an affair in the same way that we see male pastors in Zimbabwe, what we see then, that's when you know that actually this is pseudo equality. It is not, because the standard is still very much set, that actually women are not afforded the same grace and the same redemption in the way men are in the church. And that speaks volumes about Jack as well, because really and truly that behavior, if the church was any means of regulation of behavior, then we would have seen Jack not behaving that way, because he was adamant that he had a quote unquote calling.
A calling,
The only high calling he had was in relation to other women's in other regions. But anyway,
you had to go there, didn't you? You couldn't resist that one. I really still don't get that view. There's an episode where there was a guy called Miracle who allowed himself to do crazy stuff with women, and his justification was God will understand.
Yeah.
And I was that's mad. I'm like, this is mad.
Accountability. There is no accountability, because what you have is guaranteed forgiveness, guaranteed redemption, a guaranteed salvation. So you just perpetuate the same behavior and then go and never feel the consequences of your decisions.
Yeah.
Around that. Yeah. There's something that came to mind, Tinta, when you said about why it takes so long for victims to leave. And that aspect of having compassion for victims and blaming victims and saying, well, they should have known better, etc., etc. It actually diminishes the impact that the trauma of intimate partner violence does, because this is a person that you trust. So intimate partner violence is a betrayal of trust. So like any kind of trauma, that instinct is to survive. So we know that when somebody is in sort of fight or flight mode, it can be very difficult to make sort of logical decisions, because you're you're the part of your brain that does that, takes a back seat for you to be able to survive. And survival can take many forms, kind of, it can be about appeasing your abuser. It can, it can take many forms in that instant, really, to try and get through that. And sometimes staying and modifying your behavior to kind of suit and not trigger or not be seen to provoke your abuser is a survival mechanism, and not necessarily a woman just, or a victim, just lying down and taking it, in essence. So there's a lot of complexities around trauma, and I wonder whether Kanye has a lot in herself as well that she was not able to speak about, that I think influenced her way of feeling and being about herself, that then influenced how she was in this marriage.
I know one of the things as I was recording that never came to mind was the temptation to say, what were you thinking, or what's wrong with you, or can't you see through this? Because she made it very clear that at some point she said to herself, no, I am the problem. And from that point, it was literally downhill for her. And I was reading up a little more about abuse, and they said that this is a very common pattern to happen, and that's how people fall in love with their abusers, and that's very well described with the Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, Jack plays a role here. The abuser plays a massive role because they are telling you you've provoked them. They're telling you, I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't done this. Yeah. They are blaming you. They're shifting blame and accountability for them, because it's never about them. It's always you. So, if you start to hear those messages all the time, and again, remember, we spoke about culture and that notion of, akavisamari, he paid lobola, therefore you need to make it work, kind of thing, puts the onus on the victim to modify their behavior and internalize those messages that actually maybe it's me, maybe I'm not doing enough, maybe I'm the one who's being too mouthy, maybe. And Jack used the fact that Kanye ended up having sex with somebody else against her for a number of years, despite the fact that he's been community dick for a while.
Wow, community dick.
And it's that shame that is hung over women in the way it's not felt by men, because really the person who should have felt shame was him, but he didn't feel that shame. And it is that, you cheated on me, therefore I will use that as an excuse. So every time he assaulted her, it's because you did this. It's because you did. So that, and also she felt guilty about it.
And that guilt, for me, felt like it was shrouded in a lot of fear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you imagine being physically assaulted and the paralyzing fear that has? And I think this is another thing that we don't really accept in society, is that men are afraid of men. Men are afraid of men. What more women? Like, how do they think women navigate the world as well? And that's a big aspect of control and dominance, of patriarchal masculinity, that sees it to kind of have power over someone like that. But Jack also was, where was Jack from again?
What country-wise?
I wonder.
It was never discussed, so I actually don't know.
Let me comment about Zimbabwean culture, in essence, because in Zimbabwe, domestic violence only became a crime in 2006. So we have generations now who grew up where it was okay to beat your wife. It was socially acceptable, and you faced no consequence at law. And if you have men that are socialized in that kind of environment and women that are socialized in that kind of environment, then love and abuse can coexist, in your view. And you can't differentiate the two.
And this for me just feels like the need to break cycles. I have no idea how these can be broken, because it's a freaking cycle. Right?
It is a cycle.
So Jack may have picked up things from his dad, who may have picked up things from his dad, who may have picked up things from his dad. I really don't know how a cycle can be broken. And even the whole thing on the woman's side. to say if you start seeing, because one of the lessons was the moment the moment a man lays hands on you, leave. That for me is part of breaking the cycle, because if you've grown up in a community that says shinga or you're just going to perpetuate that whole thing. Honestly, hand on heart, I don't know what could be said or done to help break that cycle, both on the men's side and on the women's side.
Well, I think the first thing is that there should be a zero tolerance policy in relation to violence, and there should be a cost. There should be a social cost. There should be a shunning, a shaming, an isolation of people that do that. But what we know is actually abusers are not challenged in that way. They still maneuver the world in very much the same way, like how Jack did. He didn't really feel any, no sense of belonging from his family, no sense of accountability. And I want us to not to get to a point where we don't say, if a man hits you, leave. There should be, the onus should be on the men. Men should not be hitting, and how are we going to get there, in essence? And that's a separate conversation, because there needs to be a social cost. There needs to be greater accountability in our culture, particularly. And how we do that is that we move away from this dominance being afforded to men, from this entitlement being afforded to men, from cultural norms and social norms that afford them this entitlement, from expecting women to in essence audition and maneuver their behavior around their acceptance and their ability to be legitimized by a man. That is how we move towards women being seen as human beings, as being autonomous, and as not punching bags for fragile males.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys could sense the relief that I had when we got to the point when Kanye said that she finally broke things off completely. And it's true, she genuinely has. Well, one of the things that I was privy to was a couple of exchanges with Jack. Very, very recent exchanges. I think it was as recent as the day before I was recording an episode. And in that, you could tell that she is, in a nice way, telling him to piss off. And so she has managed to get that victory. And honestly, I have so much admiration for her.
I do too. I mean, I think it's incredibly brave of her.
Yeah.
My my instinct is that this is not it with Jack. She has 2 children by him, and he will use that as a means of control and manipulation. And she'll need to constantly reinforce those boundaries.
Well, guess what? It's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what those messages were saying. So you are actually dead on right that he will continue to try and use that as an avenue. But guess what? I think she's finally managed to get round to picking up her self-esteem. She is very confident in who she is from what I saw. And she didn't send these messages with a view to say, oh yeah, Tinto, look at what I'm now doing to prove to you. It was by pure accident that she says, oh, do you know what? Now that we're speaking about this was off the record. She said, check this out. And I was like, mad, because she was literally telling him to piss off.
Yeah. And that is a Kanye that Jack doesn't know. So Jack will have to get used to the new Kanye. And I think, often when those situations happen, and I'm speaking about this from a professional experience kind of way, is men like that will find ways to police you via the children. Another man cannot be around my children. I want to see my children now. There will be. I mean, what I want and hope for Kanye is that she continues to speak.
100%.
Speak about every minute thing that Jack does. Do not keep secrets for this man ever again, because it is in speaking that people can actually help to keep you safe and centered, so that you don't get lost in the source, because it can become, abusers are very skilled manipulators. And it's constantly reaffirming to yourself that you are doing the right thing, that you've made the right decisions and having the right people around you. And I think the very fact that she is speaking out about it means that she is over it, because what we know is actually when you are still pondering about being with someone in an abusive situation, you don't tell anybody because you don't want to be judged for going back.
Yeah. And you know, just on this whole theme of speaking about it openly, and we're just wrapping this up. What Kanye said at the end of her episode was, if there's anybody that wanted to talk about this sort of thing in confidence and didn't know how to navigate the waters and not really needs some guidance, but needs a voice from somebody who's been in it, because it always makes a difference when somebody has been through something. And they're sharing the experience. She said, get in touch. Now, this is not one of the things that I would do, because I like to keep things anonymous and keep them dissociated. But we've had a separate private conversation, and she's insisted that she actually does want to help anybody who does need help. So they're not getting a telephone number. They're not getting an email address. But if anybody wants to, you know, bounce off whatever they're feeling on Kanye's sounding board, there's actually an Instagram account that's been set up to engage Kanye. So for those listening to this episode, if you head over to African Survivor Kanye, so African and then Survivor, and then the Kanye is Kanye, you will actually get to interact with Kanye on a text basis. And off the back of that, I'm secretly hoping that you guys get to gather some strength. And men, if you're kind of going through the same thing and just struggling with either the tendency to want to abuse or actually do abuse women, I would like us to have a conversation. Because whilst I'm not an expert in this sort of thing, I also recognize how dangerous it is for both parties. It's a blessing that Kanye came out of this alive, because with the way that thing sounded, I was worried.
Yeah, I mean, the stats are that the likelihood is that he would have killed her. Yeah. And so I am incredibly proud that she is adamant to empower other women and to speak and to help other women. Yeah. And that will keep her going. Yeah, yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time, man. There was a hell of a lot to consume in this. So much. And you know, I like to speak. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I like to talk. I knew you would do a great job. And also, you're not just speaking things that aren't substantiated. You know, there's fact behind some of the things that you're talking about. There's obviously an academic aspect to it, which came out through all those college words that I tried Googling and stopped halfway because I couldn't spell the damn word. Well, you've been listening to another episode of The Feeling Station. I'm your host, Tinto, and I will catch you, not next week, because I'm taking a chill pill for the rest of the year. I need to recharge my batteries. So we're going to be back in the first week of January 2022. I wish you guys a Merry Christmas. Have a great time. Hopefully Boris is not going to cancel it for those who are in the UK, and wherever you are globally, have fun. And send me a present if you want. You know, coffees are usually a good present. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, catch you guys later. Peace. Tell me what you're feeling. Sati's on Daru Raini and Chake Zain. Tell me what you're feeling. Now that it's over. Sati's on Daru Raini and Chake Zain. Let me talk about my feelings. Let me talk about my feelings, yeah. Urudoi motoru no to kujiziro amai. Kujiziro amai. Doi motoru no to kuchiziro ama.